永遠に続くものはない。あらゆるものに終わりは来る。
Cowboy Bebop was always planned to be a 26-episode anime, but during its original run on TV Tokyo in Japan, it actually lasted for only 12 episodes. The rest of the show apparently didn't air on television because of its depiction of graphic violence, and so all of those remaining episodes, including the final ones that end the show off so well, were seemingly never going to see the light of day. Imagine being Cowboy Bebop's director, Shinichiro Watanabe, and hearing about this shit for the first time. The show that you and so many other people worked so hard on for so much time will get a half-assed first run and will end on a random episode, essentially getting left without a real ending. What the fuck do we even do in this situation? Watanabe's answer to this question comes in the form of a special Japan-exclusive episode titled Session XX Mishmash Blues. It was shown only to the viewers that caught the anime's original run, and its main purpose was to let them know that what they saw wasn't the whole show. But upon watching this episode, it becomes clear that it's something more than that. In terms of its visual content, it's a compilation of scenes from the anime, so there's nothing new there. The actual special thing about it are the voiceovers that play on top of the clips. These are all new and are all recorded by the original Japanese voice actors of the main characters. They're separated into 24 parts, with each part being named after a popular song or album. On a surface level, it might seem like these monologues are just the characters yapping about some random shit, but when you analyze them in the context of the show being censored and basically getting cut in half for its first run on television, the meaning behind them becomes much more clear. While these monologues are still done in character and are somewhat consistent with each character's personality, the writers of the show obviously wanted to use them to say some things to the viewer in a more direct manner, turning this episode into a sort of meta-commentary about the writers' thoughts on the show and the inner workings of the anime industry, as well as the consumer of its products. On top of that, it does dedicate some time to speaking about the show's main themes, which I assume was done so they could at least deliver a part of the show's main message, as most of it was explored in the episodes that weren't shown on air.
食い物はとても大切だ。何しろ人間の体はそいつが食ったもんでできてるわけだ。
Part 1 begins with Spike giving us a monologue about food. He talks about how you are what you eat and how the food you consume might be a big factor in who you are as a person. He illustrates this point by saying that an alternative version of himself called Hamburger Spike, who only ate hamburgers, would probably be a completely different person than him, which is kind of fucking funny. In his Part 10 monologue, he also says that if you give a baby only sweet things, then that's what the baby would want to eat, and could therefore miss out on the nutrients that are actually good for it. But just like he says, he obviously isn't only talking about food. The intended message here is that the things you watch and consume play a large part in who you end up becoming, and so you need to be careful about engaging only with the things that give you an easy dopamine hit. You might say that using the act of feeding a baby as an example doesn't make a lot of sense here, since a baby doesn't really have a choice when it comes to what it consumes, but this example was chosen specifically so they can make a point about how it's possible that a person's psychological growth could be stunted by the decision to always watch whatever makes them feel good, without requiring any effort on their part. Cowboy Bebop is the exact opposite of that. While it certainly can be enjoyed on a surface level, there's a lot of things that can be understood and fully appreciated unless you're paying attention to them and trying your best to figure out what's going on. Spike's monologues here are alluding to the idea that engaging with media that encourages the viewer to use their brain can be really good for you as a person, especially if you're one of those babies that only want the sugary shit. The people who wrote these monologues were obviously aware of the complexity of their own work, so I'm assuming that they wrote this out of frustration with consumers who generally prefer watching shit that is easy to follow and stimulating without requiring any effort out of the viewer. For more meta commentary about the anime industry, we can turn to Jet's monologues, which were clearly used to vent some frustrations out. He starts out by speaking about bonsai trees and how you shouldn't just cut them mindlessly. According to him, the parts of them that stick out contribute to their personality and make them stand out compared to everything else, and the people who don't understand that shouldn't be in charge of cutting them in the first place. The writers weren't even trying to hide their frustration with the people that cut up the show's original run with this one. He also talks about how, when writing something, it's not a bad thing to go against the reader's expectations. A lot of people enjoy being surprised by the unexpected, and while that may be common writing advice, it seems like the majority of writers apply it on a much smaller scale than they could. They may let some unexpected things happen here and there, but their stories are still very unsurprising at their core, because they still utilize a large amount of tropes that are proven to work, which is the generally accepted way to go, since it minimizes the risk risk of the work being unpopular and making less money. Jet's next monologue is about the making of Cowboy Bebop itself. He says it's especially hard to make something using a lot of ingredients, while still making sure that all of those ingredients get to show off their originality. I guess the point here is that making this shit wasn't easy. Conceptually, Cowboy Bebop sounds really fun, but it's not hard to imagine how a show that's inspired by so many things could turn into a fucking mess if it wasn't thoughtfully brought to life, and that probably made the fucked up original run of the show even more infuriating for the people that worked on it. In his last monologue, Jet talks about how the good thing about bounty hunting is that technically there is no right way to capture the bounty, and yet there's always someone who'll complain about the way you do things or say that your way is against the rules. He also says that the people who completely do things their own way seem to be a dying breed, but at least one thing will always stay true about them: there's no amount of money in the world that can convince them to bow down. I wonder what the writers were talking about with this one. There are technically no rules when it comes to creating and telling a story, but in reality there will always be someone to tell you that the way you're doing it is wrong if it isn't at least similar to what they're used to. But even though that's a fact, it doesn't mean that originality should be avoided. There's value in not giving in and doing it the conventional way, and it's not a value that can be measured with money. This all culminates with Jet saying that he wishes divine retribution to all the people who take away freedom, which is essentially the writers' way of saying that they hope the people that fucked Cowboy Bebop over just fucking die. While the rest of the episode is a level-headed and subtle expression of frustration, it seems like the writers were mad enough to sneak something a bit more hateful in it. And while they do take it a bit too far, it's not hard to see where that anger comes from. Putting so much work into something only to have it get messed up by things that are out of your control would unsurprisingly put most people on the edge, but the interesting thing about this episode is that it is ultimately way more hopeful than hateful. The rest of the monologues in this episode are a bit harder to understand and connect to each other in terms of their meaning, so just go through a few of my favorite ones instead.
綺麗事は嫌い。綺麗好きも嫌い。少しぐらい汚れてる方が部屋も世の中も住みやすいってもんよ。
I think that the point of this monologue is that we shouldn't judge something that seems like an imperfection as a flaw without considering how it might contribute to the work's personality. Something that might be an issue for one person can bring joy to another, and as long as the positions of these two people are reasonable, that's not something that should be ignored if you're going to play the part of a critic.
ラフィングブルが言った。泳ぐ鳥よ、お前の体が何でできているか知ってるか。俺は言った。知らねえよ。きっとどこにでも転がってる鳥の糞だろうさ。ブルが言った。泳ぐ鳥よ、お前の魂は何でできているか知ってるか。俺は言った。知らねえよ。きっとどこにでも転がってる綿ぼこりだろうさ。ブルは言った。その答えは間違っていて合っている。お前の体は宇宙の全てとつながっていながらお前にしかなり得ない。お前の魂は宇宙の全てを含んでいながらお前でしかあり得ない。それはこの私も、そして誰しも。誰かが憎ければお前は自分を憎んでいる。誰かを愛していればお前は自分を愛している。
One of the worst things about hate is that the only person that's guaranteed to be affected by it is the one that felt it in the first place. No matter who or what it's aimed at, hate will wear you down, because you're the only one that can feel its negativity to its full extent. We all live in our own different worlds, yet at the same time, all of us are part of one whole world. That's why it might seem like hatred and love can be directed externally, but since the world we perceive is only an extension of ourselves, no matter what other effects they have, these emotions will always reflect back on ourselves.
どこにも力なんか入れてない。お前の無駄な力を利用しただけだ。力の流れをコントロールするんだよ。そのためにはどんな動きにも対応できるように全身の力を抜いて、そう、水みたいになるってことだ。ブルース・リーはこう言ったそうだ。
A lot of anime fight scenes are generally focused on being very flashy, which they often achieve by making use of all sorts of visual effects or by having their characters cause immense destruction of the environment around them with their attacks. But Cowboy Bebop does it differently. Every fight in it seems to be animated according to Bruce Lee's philosophy of expressing the self through combat. Each character's personality is clearly expressed not only by every single attack they throw and avoid, but even through every small movement they make, and to complement that, the viewer is given a completely unobstructed view view of the action, with camera angle changes and cuts being kept to a minimum. The result of this is fight scenes that are visually coherent and have much more personality. Almost every single movement in any of the fight scenes is extremely memorable to me in and of itself, because it feels like they were all animated with the goal of having every character completely express themselves and their emotions through every single one of them. And there's barely any other anime that does it like this.
俺たちは皆眠りながら目覚め、目覚めながら眠っている。
The last few chapters consist of Spike's final monologues, which are generally about the main themes that the full anime explores. He talks about them until the penultimate chapter 23, in which Spike indirectly reminds us of the main purpose of this episode.
どっかのブルースマンがブルースの定義を聞かれてこう言ったそうだ。ブルースってのはどうにもならない困りごとを言うのさ。
While we did eventually see the real Cowboy Bebop and got to appreciate all the work and thought that was put into it, this episode serves as a reminder of a time in which nobody could be sure that that would ever happen. While thinking about this and watching the final moments of Mishmash Blues, a question popped into my head. What if we never got to see the real Cowboy Bebop? What if a big chunk of its artistry and meaning was buried under a rock, leaving us with only a disjointed version of what would otherwise be a masterpiece loved by so many people? I don't know how that reality would look like exactly, but thinking about it makes me appreciate Cowboy Bebop that much more, and not only that, it makes me appreciate everything. There's no use in overthinking the many possibilities of the past, but the fact is that many of the things you love could have very well not been a part of your world if things turned out even a little bit differently. That's why there's a point in trying to appreciate both the devastatingly bad and unbelievably good moments in life. I don't think there's anybody who worked on Cowboy Bebop that was 100% sure that people would eventually see the whole show and all the love they put into it, but they did put this message at the end anyway. And despite probably being extremely frustrated by the show having a premature ending and an extremely half-assed first run, they put the same amount of love in the special episode as they did in the actual show, and there's meaning in that. A meaning about expressing love and hope, no matter what happens.
探している俺は一人